The institutions are calling, and Pith is the only one with the answer. You either die a hero, or live long enough to see yourself become B2B SaaS.
Professional. How professional is that? We've got our own intro video now. I love it.
Yeah, I mean it's an absolute banger. So I'm just gonna be reusing it since until we have something better, and gives me time to spam the Discord with the link.
It works.
With you guys.
It works.
Glorious morning, Chop. How are we doing today?
Glorious morning, Pepito. I'm doing fantastically well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Back in beautiful Portugal in the Pith studio. So it's cannot be a bad day. And yeah, doing well. Weather is shit, but we'll just work out inside today.
Oh, the weather here is beautiful at the moment. I've been blessed. I don't think I wore it's nighttime now, but I don't think I wore a shirt all day while working from home today, which is my ideal scenario. I'm very happy. It's beautiful and sunny and warm. Springtime.
Was it today I saw a picture of the beach for the morning walk?
Yep.
That
took
good.
the dog for a walk and did a little bit of a meditation. Had a bit of a dip, swim. It was lovely.
But no, and then I mean today, super excited to have Austin to talk 00 because I need to get educated on all this. Reminded me of my readings of Flash Boys a bit, but no, super excited to have him on. Anything to start with? Quick intro, maybe. I mean, there's a bunch of things happening in the forum and in the community, so maybe you can give us the quick rundown of what's happening.
Yeah, well, we've got. There's a lot of stuff happening. Community council wise, we are at the end of September finishing the first half of the community council term, which goes for 1 year. We have spent just under 1 million PIS on the community thus far for the community council. Our good friend and fellow councillor within the community, Bats, has put together a beautiful Dune dashboard documenting all of the spends, where it's been going, who it's been going to, and what different initiatives we've been paying out for. And we've just put in our request for the second half of the community council budget. It's a good request. There's a whole lot in there. I won't go into it too deeply, but for those who are tuning in and want to take advantage of it, there is at least 2 or 3 full-time jobs worth of PIF in there for people to take advantage of content creation and any sort of community activations that they would like to get around. So if you're ambitious in the space, looking for a way to get in and get paid and do some cool shit and make yourself known, not just within PIF, but within the whole Web3 space, there is a multitude of opportunities there for you in the PIS community. If you want to take advantage of it, you can jump into the PIS forum to check it out, or better yet, just jump into the Discord and ask around, and there'll be people there willing to point you in the right direction and let you know what's happening and show you the ropes. It's all very exciting. Plenty of stuff coming in over the next month or so.
Come pad your CV with some decentralized jobs.
That's it. There's I see people complaining about not having opportunities to do stuff in the space all the time, but you've only got to dig just a little bit deeper to find them. And if you're motivated and hungry, there's more than enough opportunities for you to take advantage of, not only in the PIF community, but in the Web3 space as a whole. We're not the only ones doing these things. But you start at PIF and expand your horizons elsewhere. There is it's infinite opportunity season.
Yeah, come to us first, then you can go elsewhere. No, but exactly. Without further ado, we have Austin backstage. Let me bring him on. because yeah, I'm super excited about this one. And yeah, it's amazing to have Austin on. I think I've seen you do the rounds of quite the podcast, because I had to listen to a few to make sure I would at least understand some of the stuff that you guys are doing. But thanks for hopping on, Austin.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today.
How are we doing today?
Good. It is kind of like uncharacteristically cool in New York today. It's like, I don't know, it was like 14 out this morning. It's kind of a little rainy. Feels like October, even though it's like late October, but it's actually September. So, doing nice though. It's kind of, we had a hot period for a while, so it's nice that it's cooling off a bit.
Amazing. Well, yeah, it's cool here as well. It feels like the summer is ending on our side. For Chop, it is starting, so I'm quite jealous. But Austin, to kick things off, can you introduce tell us a bit about yourself, and maybe how you got into crypto at the very origin?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Austin Federa. I'm one of the three co-founders of the Double Zero project. And I spent the last, let's say, about 4.5 years, something like that. Before that, working for the Solana Foundation. So I joined at the end of 2020. I ran strategy for the organization. Had to deal with the fallout of FTX and I think I joined at like $1.50. We went up to $2.60 or whatever, down to $8, back up again. It's been a pretty wild journey. But I originally got into crypto in late 2017. I was working for a fintech company that was kind of in the process of failing, and their last sort of ditch attempt to build something real was this kind of borrow lend token on Ethereum. And it was this really interesting idea at the time of like, oh, could you make this work? What would this kind of be like? The project never went anywhere. It didn't survive, but it really got me hooked on this idea of smart contracts as something that can, be meaningful. And I think like so much of the time, the terminology in crypto turns people off to it. In a way that maybe it shouldn't, but people are judgy, and you do judge a book by its cover. And smart contract is a terrible terminology. We should just call them on-chain programs, because that's what they are. But you sit down and you learn like, oh, these are actually programs. You can write real functions in them. You can do more than have a self-reinforcing, legal document, which is sort of the way people were talking about them back then. And so I really got hooked on the whole concept, and went to work for Republic, helped them launch Republic Crypto, and then worked for Bison Trails up until their acquisition by Coinbase to become Coinbase Cloud. And at that point, went off and joined the Solana ecosystem.
That's quite the journey, Austin. You've got a wealth of experience in fintech. Clearly, is there a reason or a particular thing that drew you to Solana in the first place, as opposed to elsewhere in the crypto space?
Yeah, so Bison Trails was getting acquired, and I just felt that like a big company like Coinbase probably wasn't the right place for me to go at that point in my career. Nothing against Coinbase, but it's a much larger organization, and I kind of had that startup bug still in me. And I was interviewing with a bunch of different L1s and L2s at the time. And this was when you got to put yourself back in this. We just finished this big report on the roadmap for ETH2, back when we were calling it ETH2 and not just Ethereum. And that was a sharded ecosystem that was going to have, starting off 56 shards, going to 1,000 shards pretty quickly after that. These were going to be basically enshrined combinations of DA layers and roll-ups, sort of all within one thing. There was this beacon chain, which is this relay chain that was the message passer between the different shards. And I was kind of just like, everyone was sort of saying, this will work great. This is perfect. This is all we need. And, I was like, I'm not an engineer. I'm new to this space, but like, this feels fragmented. It feels like the power of Ethereum is composability, that one application can interop with another application. You can take flash loans on Ethereum are just like, wow, you can't do this in TradFi. Like there's no way you can do anything like a flash loan in TradFi with anonymous parties. And ETH2 seemed to break all of that. Sharding seemed like it was just throwing all of the magic that made the Ethereum of 2018, 2019, 2020, what it was, kind of out the window. And I kept having these conversations with founders of L2s or L1s, because all the L1s back then were doing sharding as well. And they were kind of like, no, 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 it'll be great. We'll solve it with bridges. It's like, okay, great. Well, it's 2025. Like, we haven't really solved it with bridges even yet. Or, you know, they'll say like, oh, it doesn't matter because we'll win. And all those answers to me felt really insufficient. And I had a coworker I'd worked with at Republic who had joined a series of other jobs, but ended up working at Multicoin and as like a junior associate at Multicoin. And he had just left Multicoin to join Solana after they did the investment in Solana. And he was like, hey, you should talk to Raj and Toli. Like, they're up to something cool here. And I was like, I don't know. I worked with like 50 different protocols at Bison Trails. Never work with anyone from Solana. He's like, just take the call. Like, they're real founders building real stuff. And I remember getting on this call with Toli and kind of asking him, because I didn't really want the job at that point. I had like 2 or 3 offers from other prominent names. And it's kind of like, what do you think of ETH2? Like, I kind of have this like concern that we're going to end up with like the Uniswap shard and the Aave shard and the DYDX shard. And he kind of just laughed at me. He was like, yeah, sharding's never going to work. You want everything in one global state machine. You want competitive markets moving as quickly as possible. He's like, there's scaling issues with one global state over the long term, but like we'll figure them out. And we're really far away from any of those limitations in anything in crypto. And I was like, this is the first answer I've gotten to this question that like checks with my gut. My gut of sharding is going to be harder than everyone thinks it is. My gut that fragmentation is probably a much harder problem to solve than people think it's going to be. And I'd love to say I was like prescient and knew that Solana would be $100 billion someday, but I wasn't. I just thought like, these are smart people taking a zag while the market's doing a zig. And I'm really interested in what I'm going to learn here. Even if the company goes bankrupt, you know, a year later or something like that, I think I'm going to learn a lot about how to take a counter position bet, and figure out just for myself what I really think is the future of this technology stack. And that was
cool.
4 years ago.
Yeah. Is going with that gut feel something that had guided you previously, or is that a bit of a light bulb moment?
I think, you know, it's one of those things where people are always like, trust your gut. And I actually think trusting your gut is usually, when you're early career, it's often the wrong decision. Because most people's gut is based on their sum total. I mean, it's based on your sum total of life experiences, right? Like, one of the things that I really feel strongly is the advent of powerful LLMs has demystified the workings of the human brain dramatically for me. It's like, oh, we're just big pattern matching engines. And yeah, we're better at it than LLM is in a lot of ways. We have personalities, we have character, we have a sense of being, and maybe those are all just abstraction layers running on our brain. But like, there is something very different about the human brain than an LLM, but there's certain parts of learning that are just very similar. Like, this is like the whole idea of like generals are always fighting the last war. That's an LLM problem, right? Your training data dictates your outcomes. And that's exactly how the human brain works too. And so I mean, I think kind of getting back to your question here is like, you need a good enough, you have to have eaten enough books to have a good gut. Like, you need a sum total of life experiences that's like enough to actually get you to a place where you can trust your gut. And my version of that was I just like dove headfirst into, I don't find books to be a great way to learn about entrepreneurship, in part because they're so sanitized. One of the powers of the podcast or the audio format is that most people, especially back in like 2012 to 2000, like maybe 18, when podcasting wasn't the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today, those thoughts were pretty uncensored. Like, you go on the All In podcast, like, you know, those are all like, they've written out their thoughts beforehand. It's all script tested. It's basically CNBC at this point. But like, you can still find a lot of these, like Odd Lost does a really good job of bringing on people who don't speak professionally for a living and therefore are not quite as filtered. And for me, like, I just started accumulating a lot of different perspectives on how technology grows and evolves, both from the operator and the investor side. And at some point, you get to a place where you start trusting your gut. It took me a while, though. I mean, I would say it wasn't probably until like maybe a year and a half into Solana, which is weird because that was like post, you know, like that was the beginning of the bear market. But to be like, oh, I think my gut's actually pretty decent here. Because in a bull market, everyone looks like a genius. And so you should never trust your gut if your gut was like trained in the bull market, because you know, any idiot can make a 50% return in 6 months in a bull market.
That makes sense. So two questions flow from that. One, I'll ask now, but you can leave this to the end of the podcast for those listening. We can make them wait. Some good podcast recommendations, whether or not that's anything
Sure.
crypto related or non-crypto related. I'd love to hear a couple. And second, you mentioned you've been working with Solana now for 4 years, but we are on here talking to you about Double Zero. So how do Double Zero and Solana fit together? How does that make sense for the audience at home?
So yeah, so 4 years is a long time to spend at a startup, and you kind of have to ask yourself about at kind of the 3-year mark, like, do I want to do this for another 7 years, or do I want to go do something else? And I really think 7 years is kind of that magic number, because the worst amount of time to be at a startup is 18 months or like 6 years. Because 18 months, it's like, oh, you hit your vest, and then like no one, like you couldn't find product market fit, for yourself basically within the organization. Leaving before a year is totally defensible. I'm actually a huge proponent of leaving at 6 months if you don't feel like the vibe is right. But like 18 months is kind of the worst. And then 6 years. 6 years is like, oh, you vested. People thought you were valuable enough to keep around, but not valuable enough to really upgrade to a different type of position. So you're really kind of thinking about like, it's a 3-year stint, or also like leaving it 4 years and 1 month is also like generally a bad sign. But it's kind of that 6 months, 3 years, like another 7 years on there is sort of the way I think about these things. And for me, it was that the problems before Solana are obviously still there. Solana has not won. I don't think any protocol will ever win. It's a constant war of attrition and growing the pie. But for me, I was looking at the problem sets ahead of Solana, and I was like, this is interesting. I could be happy here for another 7 years, but I have this bug in me to go build something. And I see this really big problem and this really big opportunity in the market that no one is addressing. And it kind of came out of the work on FireDancer and looking at that protocol, that validator client. This is for those not familiar, a new validator client for the Solana network that could do 1 million transactions per second. That was the goal of the project. And you'd hear these sort of lofty goals from the leads of the project. And then you kind of go get drinks with the engineers, and they're like, yeah, we can do 1 million transactions per second, but like, it's not going to work on the public internet. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Why are we building this thing if it's not going to work? And they're like, well, the client can do it, but like we can't actually propagate the state out quickly enough to 2,000 validators around the world to actually make this thing run as it could. They're like, we can do it on like the Jump private network, but like no one will trust the Jump private network to run all of their, infrastructure. Why would you trust it? At that point, that's just like an IBM blockchain. So there's this idea in my head of like, this was 2022, of like, at some point, and Tolly and I were talking about this back then too, at some point we're going to have to tackle the problem of the internet. And the question basically was like, do we go out and do we basically pay every validator enough money to go get a 10 gigabit dedicated connection and just try and patch that together? But the problem with that is it's very like, it doesn't scale. Every new validator, you just give them like 10 grand for a 10 gigabit connection. Like that's not going to work. So, this idea sort of sat in the back of my head for maybe like 18 months or so of like, how would we go about doing this? And the answer really comes down to like, we need to build a parallel internet. We need to build a parallel fiber system for high performance distributed systems like Solana, like Monad, like Pith Laser maybe will run on it someday. There's all these sorts of different types of systems that require higher performance than the public internet can bring. And that sounds like a quote unquote easy problem, right? It's kind of straightforward. Oh, just get a bunch of fiber. Well, the fiber industry and the carrier industry, it is like the shipping industry. It is all who you know. A lot of business is still done on paper. And so really the thing that changed this for me from like, oh, this is a great idea, someone should build this, to, oh, I should team up with Andrew and Matteo and go build this, was meeting Andrew and Matteo. And Andrew has worked for centralized exchanges before in the equity side of things. He spent the last 7 years of his career building out Jump's global trading network. And Matteo had worked for Global Crossing back in the day, which was the first company to run fiber all around the world. He owned his own telco. He built microwave and shortwave sites. So these were two people that had both the business and technical chops and industry connections to really make something like this possible. I mean, I can't stress enough that we would not be launching mainnet in less than a month if we hadn't had this like massive boost of having a bunch of engineers and a bunch of people who'd worked on building centralized versions of this network now working on building a decentralized version.
Cool. Very cool. This is maybe not a question that's actually answerable, but you mentioned Solana not necessarily being able to win in the market outright. But what do you think winning looks like for Solana at the moment, or in the market broadly? If you can't win everything outright, what does success look like for both Double Zero and for Solana?
So they're very different. So I think Solana is competing fundamentally with anything that has an execution layer. So Solana is competing with the Binance order book. It's also competing with NASDAQ. It's also competing with, Hyperliquid, and it's also competing with Ethereum. In some ways, it's competing with Robinhood. Now, it doesn't mean that these things can't be synergistic at some times, but it is an execution layer chain. And the goal of Solana is to be the best execution environment for all types of data and information exchanges. That is a lofty goal. The multiple concurrent leaders proposal, I think, is one of the most interesting bets on how this technology will go that I've seen in a long time. I'm pretty bullish on it as a concept, but Double Zero exists to support all types of high performance distributed infrastructure. Whether you are an L2 running a single sequencer and you just want that single sequencer to have 100 gigabits of connectivity and be able to ingest data from anywhere in the world faster than any competitor, that's a great use for Double Zero. If you are Solana and you want to run multiple concurrent leaders and synchronize 6,000 nodes using multicast at the speed of light, Double Zero is a great place for you too. This is really like one of the core things for me in leaving Solana was I did not want to build something competitive with Solana. I did not want to build something that was also just a protocol for Solana. It was really about trying to move this industry forward and create new tools and technologies that can benefit the whole industry. I think if we do our job correctly at Double Zero, we push the industry forward by a decade. And it's not a dissimilar bet to Wormhole or Pyth in the sense of that there's these foundational technologies that are just going to accelerate the adoption of DeFi. They're going to make it more integrated with TradFi and more competitive with TradFi, and extremely fast price feeds are very much one of those pieces of technology. Now we're going a lot deeper in the stack. This is an OSI layer 1, 2, and 3 network. But it's designed so someone like Pyth can come in and say, look, we can currently publish data rates at this fast. Our limiting factor in propagation of this happens to be the public internet. So, it's one of those things where it's an additive technology. No one's asking Pyth like, oh, migrate to Double Zero. Like, you're still going to run your own infrastructure and your own blockchain and all these types of things. But suddenly maybe you can reach consensus on pricing 30% faster than you could previously, not because we've changed anything about how Pyth works on the software level, but because we've basically shrunk the world. Like, you can kind of think about this from the perspective of like, you have a global, you have the world, right? And if you have validators all over the world, there's limits based on physics of how fast you can synchronize information. If we make the world physically smaller, suddenly that synchronization problem gets smaller. And we haven't figured out how to shrink the earth. So instead, the next best thing we can do is increase the speed of the fiber connecting everyone.
So the limiting factor there is the speed of the fiber, basically, and
it's 2 or 3 things that all collide. In aggregate, the problem is the public internet was never built for performance. It was built for resiliency and it was built for reach. So what that means is if my server is sitting in New York and your server is sitting in Frankfurt, the path it takes there is not direct. There is a line that goes from New York to Frankfurt. You can spend money and you can get space on that line. The public internet does not go that way. It's quite possible that my data sitting in New York actually bounces up to Boston first, and then it takes a cable across and lands in London. From London, it goes down to Marseille, and then from Marseille, it maybe bumps up to Amsterdam. From Amsterdam, it then moves over to Frankfurt. And so suddenly we have all these extra hops in the system. Each one of those hops is basically a point of queuing. So you can sort of think about it like on the highway. If you have a 2-lane highway and a 2-lane highway and you merge them together, we've all experienced this in real life. Even if there's plenty of room for all the cars, traffic slows down. Why does traffic slow down? Because merging is a complicated problem, and merging is still a problem in data transmission. And so even if you have plenty of capacity on all the systems, because you have all this like data switching and merging, and some data, for lack of a better term, has to switch lanes, has to go from the rightmost lane to the leftmost lane. All of that just slows down how the public internet runs. And this is where this metric called jitter comes in. We're all familiar with latency. If you grew up playing Counter-Strike or Halo or Call of Duty, it's your ping time. And the worse your ping, the more likely you are to lose. Jitter is a measurement of how quickly that ping changes. And you see this if you just like sit on your game and watch your ping time. It'll go, 20 milliseconds, 30, 20, 40, 10, 50. Like it flips back and forth. And that variance is a real killer for high performance systems. If Pith is trying to update a price every 20 milliseconds, but sometimes it takes 30 milliseconds for the data to get to them, well, they can publish a new price, but it hasn't actually reflect a market change because of this jitter and this latency in the public internet. And so by using dedicated bandwidth and dedicated fiber connections, as opposed to these sort of shared public infrastructure resources, you can get much more performant systems. And TradFi has known this for 20 years, right? There's no form of TradFi that does anything remotely related to high frequency trading that operates on the public internet. It's too slow. Speed is an edge relative to all their competitors. And this is why companies like Jump and DRW and Tower Research and HRT invest so much money in the physical infrastructure that runs their trade systems. They invest a ton of money in the software that also operates their trade systems. But the hardware, if you can be fast or smart, you should pick fast every time, because you can be smart and get something wrong. It's very hard to be fast and get something wrong.
And so if I've understood all of this correctly, which I hope I have, you're attempting to be the fast option there for anybody wanting to be the tippity top in terms of delivery.
Yeah, there's two components to this. So one is from a trader perspective, they're going to want to send their trades over the 00 network because it'll be the fastest path between, let's say, like the Binance order book and the Jupiter aggregator route. At the same time, validators actually want to broadcast consensus through this. They want to vote, they want to propagate state, they want to ingest transactions, because they'll be able to move more quickly, build bigger blocks with lower latency. And so there's kind of two halves of it. One is we're increasing the aggregate performance of all validator clusters. And the second is we're giving traders an experience that much more closely resembles trading on like a traditional exchange. And it's, there's work to be done on the exchange side to get closer to that too. But like on Solana, we have like Humidify now, which is quoting like sometimes 10 basis points of slippage, of spread on quotes. It's incredibly tight. And when we get quotes that are that tight and markets that are that tight, we start to like price discovery can finally move back on chain and off of centralized trading venues. And I think 00 is a major part of being able to basically take price discovery back from the traditional exchange world.
That's cool. There's sorry, Pepito, you go.
Yeah, Austin, can you, for in very, I guess, layman's term, like, you're a bit renting this private fiber network. Who are you renting it from? And I guess this leads a bit to the mainnet and economic token model, and how it shapes up.
So this is actually a really important point. Similar to how Pith does not run any of the things that produce the Pith prices, we don't actually run any of the fiber on the 00 network. It's all contributed by individual contributors. And so we have 11 different companies that are all contributing fiber to the 00 network. And that way we get the checks and balances and, multi-party consensus type work that you really expect from a distributed system. And so our role is really building the software, for lack of a better term, the validator client. Now it's not a validator client, obviously, but the management software, the way to basically maybe let me take a step back. Every private fiber network in the world except 00 is centrally run and centrally administrated. It's, Google admins their network, Amazon admins their network, Jump admins their network. Very similar to how prior to blockchain, there was no multi-party distributed compute system out there. There were distributed compute systems out there, right? The National Science Foundation ran a bunch of them. They were called supercomputers, but they were all run and administered by one centralized entity. And so we're taking that same approach here, where we don't actually own or lease any of the fiber. Now, for some of our contributors, they have access to the fiber already because it's Jump, and that's what they do. We have other contributors like Galaxy that are actually going out and taking new leases on fiber just to contribute it to the 00 network. And they're doing that because they think it'll make Solana more performant, which will be good for their other business interests. And so we kind of can assemble a whole group of people who are contributing fiber to 00 for a myriad of different reasons. And that is, I think, the real mark of decentralization. It is not necessarily your node count. It's not necessarily, how many validator clients you have. It's, do you have a diverse set of potentially competing interests that all want to see a project succeed? And that's kind of where the power of distributed and decentralized systems come from. It's the exact same thing that when the US system of government is working well, and even when it's not, it is still the best system of government anyone's ever come up with, even with all of its problems and failings. And decentralized and distributed systems are very much in that same category.
No, and it reminds me of as I think you mentioned earlier, the Pyth, synergies, where Pyth does not have price information. It gets it from a bunch of different financial institution parties that provide that. And you said, believe 11 contributors. Is that enough fiber today to, I don't know, connect every, hotspot in the world? And, how much of the work you're doing today is to, I guess, get more contributors to that big spider web?
Yeah, this is a good question. So if you think about the number of financial centers in the world, it's not really that many. And so a company like Jump or DRW or, one of these high frequency trading firms can basically go out and take fiber that connects all of them. And that's like a tractable problem. For Solana is running over 300 data centers all around the world. And if you include Sui and Aptos and Monad and, Hyperliquid, and you get to a number that's quite large in terms of number of different data centers that people are running things in. And that network graph is too big for any one contributor to bring connectivity to on their own. And this is why we have this consortium model of multiple independent contributors. So at launch, at somewhere around 90% of the Solana stake will be reachable from the 00 network. And we're continuing to grow out from there even more. But a lot of our network expansion is now focused actually on non-blockchain uses. And so one of the groups we're doing some work with is called Shelby. And Shelby is a storage system. It's sort of a next generation storage system that's going to compete with Cloudflare's C2 and AWS's S3 for storage in a way that like Filecoin and Arweave, they're doing something different. They're kind of long-term archival storage. They're not what's called hot storage. Hot storage needs like connectivity into a lot of markets that are historically hard to get connectivity into. One of the things that they're working on is they're working with a network that streams cricket. And so they need a lot of bandwidth and connectivity into markets that typically are not well serviced by ISPs. India is a very hard market to operate in, largely because of the Indian government. The UAE is also very hard to operate in large part because of that government. And so there's areas where we'll need to get fiber connectivity into that are not typically places that are financial centers or places that people run nodes today. And so this is kind of where like the multi-party interest is really key to 00's success, because if we bring fast connectivity into somewhere like Mumbai because it's needed for one type of application, well, suddenly it becomes possible to actually run validators there, which is very hard to do today. or the UAE as well, somewhere where it's very hard to run validators. Lots of people want to run their validators in Dubai or somewhere else in the UAE, but the internet infrastructure doesn't really support it, and the economics don't really support it on a one-off basis. But when we're talking about sort of this aggregation of multiple users and multiple use cases, suddenly we get this classic thing of cost sharing. And in a cost sharing system, it lowers the cost for every participant while giving them a higher quality of service.
Makes tons of sense. And so how does the token come in the economics, on a high level basis?
Yeah, so tokens are sort of the best tool we've ever created for high level alignment and consensus. And so the token in the 000 network is basically a token that allows users to pay fees to access the network. And so if you're a validator, you pay a seat fee to operate on it. And if you're an RPC or you're trying to do something along those lines, it's more of kind of a pay per request type model. About 50% of the tokens of the rewards collected are burned. The other 50% are distributed out to contributors. But really importantly, our contributor distribution mechanism does not run on proof of stake. There's great things about proof of stake, but proof of stake is really only necessary if you're securing like state. And we're not. We're basically a stateless network. There's no $4 billion of USDC minted on 000 or, DeFi contracts or, loans or something like that. We don't have something durable that you can steal on the 000 network because it's a data network. It's not a compute network. What that means is that our reward model doesn't have to reflect the need for persistent security. We need momentary security, moment to moment, but the way you provide that is a little bit different. So our system much more closely resembles proof of work. In a proof of work system, if I have 10% of the Bitcoin hash power, I will get 10% of the rewards. On a proof of stake system, if I am running 10% of the validators, I will not get 10% of the rewards. I need 10% of stake to get 10% of the rewards. And so what we have is a system called proof of utility, which you can read about. We've got a whole blog post that goes into this, but we use Shapley values to calculate how much each link, each piece of fiber adds to the network in terms of quality and value. And we use that to calculate a reward rate on an epoch per epoch basis for each link in the chain. What that means is, as validators move around the world, the utility of each link will change. And the other thing it means is if a contributor says, hey, this link is really valuable, and maybe it's a link run by Jump, they can say, I actually think I can get a faster connection between, let's say, Tokyo and Singapore. And if they get a faster connection between Tokyo and Singapore, they're going to take a bunch of the rewards away from the current link contributor. And so we do the thing that blockchain does best. We use greed and self-interest, weaponized through capitalism, to produce positive sum outcomes. And that's really what this whole thing is about. We want all of our bandwidth contributors competing with one another, because that'll produce the best outcome for users and it will make them the most money. And our benchmark for all of this is the public internet. So if you contribute a link that isn't used, you don't get rewards. If you contribute a link that is not faster than the public internet, you also won't get rewards. It's ruthlessly capitalistic in terms of its utilitarianism.
I love it. I love it. I've been following your tweets a little bit, Austin, and you've been posting periodically about the percentage of mainnet Solana stake operating on 000. And I have at what point would 100% concern you if you ever got to that level? Like what is the sweet spot there? Is there a risk that it becomes too high?
No, we actually want it to be 100%.
Okay.
And the reason you should think about this from the perspective of, if one operator ran every node, that would obviously be a problem. But we're not an operator. We're a network, for lack of a better term. And so right now we have this like really elegant fallback mechanism where if 000 network goes down, everyone just falls back to the public internet. And the goal really is to get as much stake on 000 as possible, and I really mean stake. No one's staking to us. Enough. The number of validators operating on 000 from Solana is really important, because every time a validator joins the network, that's one more connection that can go over the 000 network instead of the private internet. And we eventually reach a tipping point where enough of the network of the Solana network is connected to 000 that protocol developers can start raising limits. They can say, okay, like previously we were having to balance for the public internet's performance. We don't have to do that anymore. We can start using 000 for all of this stuff and start raising the protocol limits and allow more and more activity to happen on the Solana network. This is kind of like, it's the idea of like, as people get faster and faster CPUs in their machines, you can raise the limits of the protocol as well. As the network connectivity increases, you can also continue raising the limits. And so a lot of stuff right now on Solana is bottlenecked not by how fast CPUs people have in their machines, but how quickly data can be synchronized between all of the nodes. And if we can make that 30% faster, the Solana network can maybe run 4 times faster.
And what's the impediment to people moving over to 000? What's the what's stopping the other 84% at the moment? I think you're at 16 right now. What's stopping the other 84% from making the move?
Well, we are in testnet at the moment, and so testnet only consists of 8 fiber links around the world. We have New York, we have San Jose, we have one in Tokyo, we have one in Singapore. We then bump over the European Triangle and get to Frankfurt, and then we've got Prague connected in as well. But that's not a ton of geographic reach at the moment. So when our mainnet launches, we'll be launching with over 50 different links as opposed to the 8 that are currently live. Also, many of the new links will be 100 gigabit links as opposed to the 10 gigabits that we have today. And so really what it is just we got to get to mainnet. And I think people will see a much more compelling reason to join the 000 network. Right now, the folks who join it are seeing improved performance, but you can't access it everywhere. If you're running a validator, in Chicago, you're not going to, the 000 network's not going to benefit you because you have to transit over the public internet before you get to actually a 000 connection. And so it's really just about expanding geographic footprint. And then we'll be opening that up to validators to join later this month.
And how far away roughly is mainnet? Is it going to be like a gradual transition into having those 100 people on there, or is it going to be almost all happening at once? Because there's obviously a big jump between where you're at now with 8 and 100.
Yeah, definitely. So, when we open up mainnet to any Solana validator, anyone who's in the existing leader rotation schedule will be able to join. Basically, any existing nodes will be able to join. And so if you're looking to join 000 with a new network, you'll basically spin up a Solana validator, validate it for an epoch or 2, and then you'll be eligible to join the 000 network. Because these are physical fiber lines, we have about 75 lines that are in process at the moment. We'll have about 50 of those ready for mainnet launch this month. And the other ones will come online between now and basically the end of December. And so the network will be in a constant state of improving itself. And, we'll add more and more connectivity in. And so it may be that when we launch, for example, we don't have a line into Buenos Aires. But within a few months of launch, there'll be connectivity down into Buenos Aires. And then suddenly people who are like, I've always, there's a bunch of people in Argentina that are very interested in blockchain and have been for many, many years. And so there are folks who want to run validators down in Argentina. You can't right now. It's too physically far away from the rest of the state to be able to profitably run a node there. There's some folks running in South Africa that it's incredible they're able to do it, but they're taking a pretty big penalty by running nodes in South Africa, which is incredible, right? But we want to support them with additional fiber capacity down there if we can make that work. And so you sort of think about this as like every additional link we add in the chain increases the utility of the 000 network to every blockchain running on top of it. And so we're never done from that perspective, right? Like I would love connectivity into every data center in the world. It'll take us a number of years to get there. But it's not out of the reach of possibility.
Yeah. It kind of leads into, there's a question in the chat there about what about countries where it's all government infrastructure, and is there a fear of central control or shutdown, or do you kind of have to rely on third parties being brave enough, I guess, to spin that kind of thing up.
Yeah, it's kind of it's an interesting mix. You have some countries that are just never going to allow something like this in, but you'd be surprised. Like there are folks in mainland China that are looking at contributing capacity to the 000 network. Um,
Okay.
a lot of times telco, because it's OSI layer 1, 2, and 3. Like remember your ComSci 101, right? There's 7 layers in the OSI stack. We're dealing with the bottommost layers. And so even things you think wouldn't be possible, like for example, we're exploring an overland route that goes from Tokyo to Frankfurt through Russia and Siberia because it's much faster than going, like you might be surprised to learn this, but the world is smaller at the top than it is at the middle. And so if you can go, up and around as opposed to going around the equator, it's actually much faster. You might think like, well, how would you get a line that goes through Russia? Aren't there sanctions? Well, there's carve outs for telecoms in all of the sanctions because these are considered critical infrastructure services. And it's very different than what than something else that would be sort of at the application layer. And so in a lot of these places, even where you have like governments that run and control the infrastructure, there's carve outs for private networking because this is considered to be critical infrastructure. Like, this is, even the government of India, which is like very restrictive on a lot of crypto and cloud and information services. You can get fiber into these countries for these types of use cases because it's so critical to the functioning of capital markets. And because of that, we have a lot of ability to get into markets that we may not otherwise be able to get into. Now, there's a whole question about like, in the long term, like if these countries become anti-blockchain, are they going to cut off 000 connectivity? It's possible, right? But they also like, you got to believe that the Great Firewall of China can differentiate an Ethereum node from, a normal file sharing service. And so at the end of the day, like censorship resistance, the public internet is not a viable alternative to government censorship. We like to pretend it is, but like the Bitcoiners are kind of right here. Like you got to be able to validate blocks offline, broadcast from a satellite at like 1 kilobit per second. Like if you really truly want government level censorship resistance, like the Bitcoiners are kind of right here. And I think we should just accept that as an industry and move to a place where we're actually able to compete with TradFi by using the same kinds of technologies they are for communication. I think the public internet, as much as I love the public internet, I'm a public internet maxi. It's a little mid curve that everyone is sort of treating the public internet like it's something sacred.
Interesting. This is I imagine relatively easy to explain to the technically literate people who I would imagine you spend the majority of your time talking to about 000. But how do you go about explaining the importance of this to a retail base and making the case to them that they should be concerned about or supporting 000 as something that is critical, because it's obviously a critical infrastructure in much the same way that oracles are or Pyth is in the broader crypto ecosystem. So how do you go about making the case to those people, or do you not? Do you kind of let them figure that out on their own, because you don't really need to? You've got all of the big players there already.
Yeah, I don't think our main constituency is retail users. We love retail users, right? But like at the end of the day, Pyth is not also a retail user product. Now it has benefits to retail users, but fundamentally, like you are talking with DeFi protocols, you are talking with, people building these types. It's very similar to us. Our core audience are basically like professional traders, people who operate RPCs and validators, and the protocol developers who build these types of systems. And so what we think like the average user of a blockchain, the role that they can play is very much in like, hey, we want this thing to go faster. Like it's almost like a classic like American like medical ad, like talk to your developer about 000, see if it's right for you. Like that really is the thing we're asking folks to do, is like, hey, if you see the landscape changing and maybe your fast chain isn't quite as fast as it was before, and you're worried about, oh man, how do we compete with X, Y, or Z new thing coming on the scenes? talk to your devs, see if if the system that has been built on the protocol that you love would benefit from the high speed connectivity of 0.0. Not everything will. The Ethereum base L1 not going to benefit from 0.0. There's 30-second block times. That's plenty of time to synchronize on the public internet. Bitcoin probably not going to benefit from 0.0 either. But if you're building a Bitcoin L2, if you're building an Ethereum L2, if you're building a fast new L1, these are all types of systems that 0.0 can likely benefit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Pepito, anything more for Austin?
Got one. So you're starting with Solana. What are the next ones, or how fast do we go to others?
Yeah.
And second part of the question is, on like less than a month till mainnet, what's on the docket to make sure everything's ready to go for mainnet?
Yeah, one of the things that I think we've been surprised at is how much magical thinking there is around networking in protocol developers. There's sort of this idea of like, well, we just propagate data and then like the internet takes care of it. And it's really not how it works, right? So there's a few unlaunched chains that we're working with. As I mentioned, Shelby, which is this storage network, it's getting built out by Jump and Aptos. We've talked to the Fogo folks about 0.0 as sort of a core component of what they're building, which seems pretty interesting. There's a few L2s we're in good conversations with too, because they have problems with state propagation. They don't have it's a central sequencer, right? It's running on one server, but they still have to communicate out what's happened on that central sequencer to everyone else. And that's a huge bandwidth consumption problem. And then there's other existing L1s that we're talking with as well. I think one of the things that I think will happen is like we picked Solana first because Solana has the most pressing need. It's the highest transaction count to node count, like that ratio of like TPS per node is the highest of any in the industry. And so Solana is the hardest one, and if we can nail Solana first, I think that's a really good symbol to the rest of the industry that like, hey, like if we can handle synchronizing 7,000 nodes on Solana, we can probably do a pretty good job for your protocol as well. And so this is kind of like an old Tollyism, is like start with the hardest problem, because when you're done with it, everything else is easier.
Cool. All right, I've got 3 quick fire questions for you before we wrap up, Austin.
Great.
One, outside of 0.0, what's exciting you in the space at the moment?
It's exciting me outside
2
of 0.0.
Sorry. 2 is your podcast recommendations, and we'll save the third for when you're done.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on between like. So my first answer is prop AMMs. Prop AMMs are one of the coolest things I've seen in the last year and a half in the space. These are basically AMMs that have all of their trade logic and like built into them on chain. So typically what happens with any type of prop trading system is you have a proprietary trade server. It's looking at data and what's going on, and then it's sending out actions based on what it's seeing. With a prop AMM, you're moving as much of that on chain as possible. And so it is detecting like, hey, is this probably bad order flow? And then if so, I'm going to give it a bad price. Is this likely a retail user? Like, okay, I'm going to give them a good price because I don't think they're, trying to screw me over. So prop AMMs are super interesting. I think like Humidify is like, I found that very interesting. I like what Aptos is doing about breaking up the concept of a validator from one machine running something on it to sort of a logical cluster of machines that makes up what we might call a validator, but is in reality maybe 5 or 6 different actual physical boxes. I really like experimentation with nodes. That's part of what I like about Mega ETH as well. Their model includes like node specialization, and I think we're going to see more and more of that in the near future across multiple networks. Solana is doing this right now in separating the RPC package from the validator package. But I think we may even get more specific where there's certain types of nodes that are able to process certain types of transactions and others that are not. So Specialization to me feels like one of the next major frontiers for blockchain, as well as kind of the prop AMM scene that we're seeing.
Awesome. Very interesting. It's not something that I was on my radar, so that's I love it. Second,
Yeah.
podcast recommendations.
All right. Okay. So I think in general, I'll say like the Dispatch, which is like a fairly new media publication. They're great. I think they're fairly counterculture while still being very smart. So one of the podcasts I really love there is Advisory Opinions. It's basically a podcast all about the Supreme Court by it's David French and Sarah Isgur, who sort of like I would say are both sort of like center right folks spiritually. But they're strong constitutionalists, and if you get a lot of news about how the Supreme Court is just like failing at its job, like this is a podcast for you. It'll give you a very different perspective on what actually might be going on there. So I really like that. I think they do a very good job. We can go into a bunch of other ones too. Search Engine, which is by my friend PJ. He used to do a podcast called Reply All. It's all kind of about questions you can't get the answer to on the internet. That's a super good one too. There's this show Threshold, especially their earlier seasons. It's all about how complex systems, mostly environmental systems, kind of fail and are at tipping points. They do a really nice job looking at areas like should we drill in Alaska from like multiple perspectives, and try not to steer the audience in any sort of one conclusion. So that's another one. And then, Odd Lots, like just go listen to Odd Lots. Almost everything they do is an exceptional take on something that is going on that you'll get sort of a little bit of a, oh, I never thought about it that way kind of perspective on.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you very much, Austin. And a final question, which I ask all of our guests at the end of the podcast, which is if you were starting today, knowing everything that you know already, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give yourself or somebody looking to get into the crypto industry?
I like that. I have one other podcast recommendation I forgot to give you.
Oh, yeah, please.
I think it's really important. So you have to go back and find this. They haven't put out episodes in a very long time. But Recode, which was the Walt Mossberg and forgetting the other guy, and Kara Swisher. And I know Kara Swisher is a little bit of a charged name nowadays in tech, but like the 2014 to 2020, 2019 era of that podcast, specifically the sessions at the Code Conference. Those are some of the best master classes in like how to build businesses, what entrepreneurship and startups and venture capital really is about. I have not found a show that gets anywhere near as good as that show did on these topics. And so the old stuff, the new stuff is like more of a social project than I like, but the old stuff is incredible. In terms of advice I would give myself, I think I was very concerned in my younger career about if I was doing the right thing, if this was on a good track or something along those lines. And I think what I realized in retrospect is that the things you like, as long as the things you are doing feel like they're worthwhile, like you're learning something in them, I wouldn't worry too much about what the thing is. Like chasing the shiny object is a great way to not learn anything and also not make a lot of money. Like joining Solana was very much not a consensus bet. The consensus bet would have been to join a protocol whose token is now down by 85% since 2021. And I think it's really important to say, like, if you're like, oh, if you're joining a job for like the lifestyle or for the benefit or something like that, go into investment banking. Right? Like that's a job where you can be like mid-tier good at what you're doing and pull in $350K 5 years out of school. Like it'll burn you out. But like you're gonna feel dead inside. But like you're gonna, like if you're doing stuff because you have a pile of student debt, like clear the student debt, focus on that, whatever. If that's not the position you're in, don't chase the shiny thing. Chase the thing that you think is intellectually curious and that you're working with people who, like, the worst feeling you can have early career is being one of the smartest people in the room. You want to be one of the dumbest people in the room early career. If you're one of the smartest people in the room early career, it means there's no one as good as you with 10 years more experience there. that's a big red flag.
That makes a lot of sense. That's all for me, Austin. Thank you very, very much. I've gotten a whole lot smarter from this, and I thankfully still feel like one of the dumber people in the room, I think, which is a good thing.
That means you're in the right spot, man.
Exactly. Thank you very much for your time, man. I've learned a lot and I really appreciated chatting to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks a ton, Austin. Well, yeah. Feeling very dumb. No, but this was really cool. Amazing.
Yeah. Great.
Amazing. Do I have any alpha for next week? I do not. We do not have a guest yet.
Oh, we do not.
booked.
I might have one for us though, Peter. I'll swing you a message after this.
All right. Amazing. Any parting words, parting thoughts? Not to my end.
We've got a whole lot more viewers, so I'll plug the governance forum again. Infinite opportunity season. We have a whole lot, 1 million plus PIF up for grabs within the community for a whole range of different things. The people who want to pad out their resume, get some experience, build some content, get really involved in the Web3 space. There is at least 2 or 3 full-time jobs worth of things you can be doing in the PIF community if you are motivated and keen to do it. All it takes is you to make that happen. But it's all there, ready for the taking. Check out the PIF governance forum, jump into PIF Discord, ask somebody who knows some things about stuff. You can DM me, you can DM Pepito, you can DM basically any one of the prominent PIF community members to find out about how to get involved, and they will point you in the right direction. No excuses. If you want to get involved in crypto in a more substantial way, you can do it here. It's the ball is in your court.
And the URL for the forum is forum.pith.network in case you want to go check it out. And go check it out. It's not in case you want to. But Chop, amazing. Thank you. And Pythians, thanks for joining in. Was another banger. Number 20. 00. 20. Quite fitting. But yeah. See you next week, Chop and Pythians.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.